I'm here to tell you that no one at Brookfield has communicated with the Prime Minister in relation to Brookfield or its business. That's what we're required to monitor. That's what I'm here to confirm.
My question is, when was the last time you communicated with the Prime Minister? And you're required to answer.
The Chief Operating Officer of Brookfield testified at committee today for over 2 hours. He was pressed for answers, told to provide documents about Carney's investments, and tried to obfuscate information from both Bloc and Conservative MPs. But Michael Cooper brought forth the biggest concern and revelation about Mark Carney's potential conflicts of interest that we have seen so far. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Mr. Bieber. I appreciate you being under time so that we can get to questions. We're going to start with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
At Brookfield, when Brookfield's value increases, the value of stock options and deferred share units also increase. That's how these instruments work, correct?
Yes, when our share price increases, the value of those instruments do increase, yes.
And that basic reality doesn't change simply because those instruments would be placed in a blind trust. The value would still rise when the value of Brookfield rises, correct?
Yes.
So if someone holds Brookfield options and units in a blind trust or not, they personally benefit when Brookfield performs well. Isn't that right?
Anybody who holds those instruments, whether during employment or following employment, derives the benefit from those instruments. That's correct.
And any instrument can be sold, bought back, cash settled, or unwound in an instance where, for example, if Parliament required by law divestment by sale, that possibility exists, correct?
The Prime Minister would have certain instruments as part of our long-term incentive plans. There are certain instruments that are less liquid than others. I'm happy to get into the details of that if you wish.
I would, but the premise is what I need to settle is that they can be sold, bought back, or cash settled or unwound. It is possible. Should it be a requirement? Is that correct?
Yes, it's possible.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we are off to the races. So, Mr. Barrett has opened his questioning on one of the most important aspects of Mr. Carney's disclosure, and that's his stock options. So no matter what Brookfield does, no matter where they go, as long as the value of Brookfield's shares increases, Mark Carney will continue to benefit. The Liberals can talk about this blind trust all they want, but the fact that there's these stock options in there, he knows he has Brookfield stuff in there. So just to recap, a stock option. This is something that employees are sometimes given at companies as incentives to either stay, or sometimes executives negotiate stock options as part of their, severance package, and they sometimes do that even before they actually join a company. That way they can get the benefit of A, their salary, B, their bonuses, and C, potential stock options that would incentivize them to work in the best interest of the company and to offer staying power so they stay in their position. So a stock option is essentially you are given stock, and the stock that you are given is typically it's valued at the time of which it's given. So let's say Brookfield today was worth $1 a share. It's worth a lot more than that, but just for the sake of math, $1 a share. And I'm given 100 stock options. So I have $100 worth of Brookfield stock, which I didn't even have to buy. That's the great part. Now, let's say I leave the company but I still have those stock options, and they're going to mature in, say, 6 years. Now, 6 years from now, Brookfield does really well. Those are now worth $10 a share. Then they mature. I can then exercise the option on those stocks, which is I can sell those stocks. And because they're now worth $10 a share, you do the simple math, and I get $1,000 now. And I didn't even buy anything. So when you're talking about Mark Carney, who has, I believe, over 400,000 of these shares, valued at around $7 million or something like that, and they go up in value, even $1 a share, well, every time that share value goes up $1, he makes another $400,000. So when he's making decisions and they're benefiting Brookfield, they're benefiting Mark Carney. This is the whole premise of this. This is never mind all the rest of the companies that he's invested in. This is just Brookfield. And Brookfield, they keep popping up everywhere.
They're long dated, so we get that. But that's generally how compensation contracts work. That's not some kind of unique. That's not something unique to Mr. Carney, since you brought him up.
Well, long term, yes. In some cases, exercisable in shorter horizons. In some cases, the ultimate value is received far into the future.
Can you explain briefly how stock options or deferred share units and notional long-term incentive plans work at Brookfield? What drives their value?
Yes, I'd be happy to, and I will try to be brief. Helpfully, all disclosure relating to Brookfield stock options and deferred share units is disclosed in detail in our public filings, so it's very much available. In a nutshell, stock options are rights to acquire shares of Brookfield at a certain price, and those exist and during their pendency are exercisable, subject to vesting, because when we award them, people take subject to vesting schedules. So even though you were awarded them, they have to vest during the time that you were with Brookfield, and then exercisable for stock that can then be sold into the market.
So just quickly, what does he mean by vesting, versus investing? So when they hand out these stock options, he's essentially saying they have to sit there, right? They have to sit there for X amount of time before you can actually sell them. And that's the exercising of the option there. That's what he's talking about. So when you hear the term vesting, it means sit there and continue to the value of the company.
Deferred share units are slightly different. They also track the value of a Brookfield share, but they are not actually shares. And when they mature, they are paid out to the individual based on the value of the share at that time. They are the second component to some of our LTIP programs.
Are you able to give us approximate value range of options and deferred share units that Mr. Carney still holds?
As I said in my response letter, that's personal and private information, and that's not something that Brookfield is permitted to disclose to the committee.
Well, what I will say is that you enjoy parliamentary privilege while you're at this table, and this committee is not constrained in its ability to request information or documents. But I'll move on for the moment.
Okay.
So that was interesting. So what actually happened before committee is the Conservatives ended up sending a letter to Brookfield, and they asked for the value of the stock options and deferred stock options of Mark Carney. So what it sounds like the response is, oh, well, that's private. That's the Prime Minister of the country, and it's one of the core aspects of the questions from Canadians about the Prime Minister and how much he's actually going to be benefiting from these stock options and deferred stock options in Brookfield. But that's private. Well, when you enter public service, there's some things that don't really become private. And this is what Mr. Barrett's saying. Oh, well, that's great, but you have parliamentary privilege, so you can tell us that, and this committee can also compel Brookfield to produce those. But moving on, and you can see how nervous Mr. Bieber is. He's fumbling with his pen, he's fumbling with his fingers. I don't think he's really happy to be there.
Increases in Brookfield's performance increases the value of the instruments that Mark Carney still holds. So he makes more when Brookfield does better. Yes?
In relation to the stock options and deferred share units, yes, as the value of Brookfield increases, the value of those instruments increase. There are also carried interest entitlements that relate more specifically to funds that we manage.
Brookfield was asking why it should appear before the committee, given the topic of our study and reviewing the Conflict of Interest Act. I wanted to specify what our mandate is. We need to review whether or not to extend the scope of the legislation. We want to increase transparency, prevent conflicts of interest, avoid potential or apparent conflicts of interest, regulate having assets in a tax haven by public office holders, limit the use of blind trusts. And so as soon as we hear from witnesses who tell us that Brookfield is a champion of tax evasion, and we know that the Prime Minister has interests in Brookfield, you'll understand why your presence here is mandatory.
We respect the spirit in which this committee is undertaking its work. First and foremost, the reports that you've heard are completely false. I've tried to explain in response to some of the questions that we've already received that Brookfield pays all taxes that are applicable, and we have demonstrated systems in place and structures in place to do that, and we do want to be helpful in your quest to assess whether or not your current rules apply and apply effectively.
Donc, vous nous dites ici que
So you're saying that Brookfield does not do tax avoidance, which is completely legal. That's not something that you do? You don't do any kind of avoidance? Not tax evasion, tax avoidance. So what you're saying today is that Brookfield does not practice any kind of tax avoidance. Yes or no?
This is an interesting question. So, this is what happens when you try to combat a narrative. So there's been people that have testified in committee, and there's been reports from the media that actually show that Brookfield is trying to avoid paying lots of taxes, and that is all done out of country, because that's how you do it. They set up these offshore accounts in jurisdictions where there is no tax, or very, very low, and then by the time that money actually gets back to Canada, they don't really pay a lot of tax. So Bieber is sitting there saying, well, we pay all tax applicable. Well, that's not the same thing as saying, well, do you avoid paying tax? Because you could avoid doing it legally, and therefore you're paying only the applicable taxes. So you could actually be saying that you are avoiding taxes, but only paying those that are applicable to you. And I'm sure the shareholders aren't going to be too happy if they say, oh, we don't practice any tax avoidance at all. We don't do anything to reduce our tax threshold. I'm sure shareholders are not going to be too happy with this, but this is the problem. And if Brookfield was doing this and there was no Mark Carney, people wouldn't really care that much. People don't care, or people didn't really care before this. Now, is it annoying that corporations can do this? Yes, but that's not the corporation's fault. That's the tax law, right? So you have to separate that. Wealthy people, wealthy corporations are going to do whatever they can to reduce their tax threshold and stay within the confines of the law. When you get into tax evasion, that is a criminal offense, and that is deliberately not paying taxes that you would have otherwise have to pay, not disclosing all of your income properly, all of this stuff. So this is an interesting little pickle that Mr. Bieber is in already with the block.
Practice tax planning the way any other company practices tax planning.
Je comprends que vous ne voulez pas utiliser le
I
terme
understand that you don't want to talk about tax avoidance, which is a technical term, and I understand that you're not the only ones who do tax avoidance. We understand that it is completely legal, but we are looking into this because it's not because something is legal that it is morally acceptable. There's a study by the Canadian Revenue Agency, and you must understand our concern, and it shows that the federal government is missing out on $26 billion in taxes every year. And for the category of tax avoidance, it's about $3 billion per year, which is not insignificant. And so that's why I would like for us to look at the minimum global tax. How much time do I have left, Chair? 1 minute, 40 seconds, Mr. Thériault. What I would like to know is whether or not Brookfield benefits from from Mr. Carney's statement where they do not have to pay the global minimum tax.
No, to the best of my knowledge, we are subject to all those rules in every jurisdiction in which we operate.
Attendez là. À ma connaissance, ça veut dire quoi?
What does that mean to my knowledge? Does that mean that it's possible but you're not aware of it?
Block is sharp, man. They're sharp. Really, really sharp. And just going back to Bieber's answer, I don't know if he went to the, committee preparation course that CBC took. Well, we don't call it tax avoidance. We call it tax planning. Just like Catherine Tate says, well, we don't have performance bonuses. We don't have bonuses at the CBC. We have performance incentive compensation. So they're not bonuses. Even though they're the exact same thing, we call it different so I can say that we don't have bonuses here. Or they'll call it at-risk pay. That's the other thing they'll call it. At-risk pay. Meaning you have to achieve these certain metrics in order to get your bonus. So there's a risk that you may not be paid that bonus, so they call it at-risk pay. That way, when you're having normal conversations with people and they say, oh, do you get paid a bonus in the government? No, we don't get paid bonuses at all. Oh. But then people don't volunteer. Well, we get at-risk pay. Tax planning, folks. Tax planning.
It would be unlikely, but I did not...
Peu probable. Ça veut dire
Unlikely? What does that mean?
vous n'êtes pas en mesure de répondre à cette question.
Can you not respond to the question today?
say that Brookfield complies with all laws across the globe relating to tax.
Monsieur Carney,
Mr. Carney, 6 months before an OECD decision to exclude the United States from the global minimum tax, even though Canada had put that measure in place. But before that, he moved headquarters to New York. 6 months later, he says American businesses are not subject to that global minimum tax. And you're saying that you're not benefiting from that. Is that what you're saying? That you're not benefiting from it?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And we didn't move anything.
Okay.
And I'd love the opportunity
Alors
to talk
pourquoi
to
le faire?
No, that's it.
Oh, isn't that interesting? So you moved your headquarters to the United States, where there was a exemption from the global tax minimum. Could explain why it was moved. And then Mr. Bieber tries to say, we didn't move anything. Really? That's going to be an interesting answer to follow up on. Because if you didn't move anything, why was there need for a shareholders vote? Why was there a need for Mark Carney to send a letter to the shareholders and the board saying, hey, we're considering moving the headquarters of Brookfield to New York from Toronto. Please ensure that you support this. Please do that. And remember, Mark Carney was trying to say that he didn't do that either. So that's interesting that Mark Carney says that he didn't do something that he actually did. And Justin Bieber, the Brookfield Bieber, he's trying to say that they never did something that they actually did either. Very, very interesting, folks. So he doesn't recall, to the best of his knowledge. He's not really doing too well. This is three MPs in, folks. We didn't show you the Liberal. 3 MPs in, and he's already starting to have some problems.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bieber. I want to ask you some questions about carried interest payments that you alluded to earlier. Mr. Carney's ethics disclosure indicates that he is entitled to carried interest payments, which are essentially future bonus pay from the Brookfield Transition Fund 1, which he helped set up. Mr. Carney also co-chaired the Brookfield Transition Fund 2 as well as the Catalytic Transition Fund. Is Mr. Carney entitled to carried interest payments in respect of those funds?
No, he's not. And the reason for that is we were in the process of setting up those funds when Mr. Carney decided to leave Brookfield to pursue the Liberal leadership. And we had not yet instituted any allocation of carry from those funds. Those funds had not yet been raised. When we talk about launching a fund, we're starting the marketing of that fund, and they had not yet reached a conclusion, even an initial closing of those funds, and therefore we hadn't allocated any carry. Had he stayed with Brookfield, he certainly would have been entitled to some.
Thank you for that. And of course, he is entitled to carried interest payments in respect of the first fund, Brookfield Transition Fund 1. I just want to confirm that that fund is registered in Bermuda.
Registered in Bermuda? Yes, I believe that one is.
And the Brookfield Transition Fund 2 is also registered in Bermuda?
I don't have that information at hand.
Well, I would note a March 26, 2025 CBC News report that indicates that the Ontario Business Registry indicates that the governing jurisdiction for the Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1 and the Brookfield Global Transition Fund 2 is Bermuda. I presume you're not disputing that.
I won't dispute that.
And
And
I would also just ask that the Catalytic Transition Fund you'll confirm is registered in the Cayman Islands.
I can take that away and make sure that I'm not misspeaking on which jurisdiction it's part of.
I think you know the answer to that. It's yes.
Oh, Cooper. So just quickly, folks, I'm sure you're all either aware or you assume this. Bermuda and the Cayman Islands are tax havens. That's why they're registered there.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the schedule of payments with respect to carried interest from the Brookfield Transition Fund 1. When does the fund mature?
Transition Fund 1 would have a maturity of 10 years plus a 2-year possible extension, which would take it to 2032 to 34, I believe.
2032 or 2034. So it would be at that time that the carried interest payments would be paid out.
Towards that, and I would say that regardless of where the fund is actually established, everything that I mentioned in relation to Madame Lapointe's question hold for everything in that fund.
Now, just in terms of what is in that fund,
Yes.
there are new investments in that fund, correct?
There are investments in that fund. They're not necessarily new.
But if there were new investments in that fund, that would increase the value of carried interest payments, would that potentially?
If additional capital were invested in that fund, it could, if they're good investments.
Okay. Now, Brookfield CEO Bruce Flatt was quoted in a National Post article dated March 15th, 2025, in which he described carried interest payments in the following way, quote, "Put simply, carried interest is our share of the profits realized on an entire fund subject to that fund exceeding a minimum target return for clients. If we meet fund expectations, we get 20% of the profits," close quote. So you would agree that that's an accurate characterization of how carried interest in respect to the fund works.
I think that's a fair summary. Subject to that, the subject to is a very significant part of how carried interest works.
Right. So Brookfield ideally would get 20% of the profits if the threshold had been met or exceeded. Now, in terms of carried interest payments to the managing partners, what is the range? What is the percent of that 20%?
Well, it completely ranges by fund. And
And
because
I'm asking with respect to the Brookfield Transition Fund 1.
Need a quick response, Mr. Bieber, please.
it's a proportion of the total that Brookfield is
I'm
entitled
asking
to.
what is that portion?
Okay. May have to come back to that, Mr. Cooper.
Okay, so what was going on there? So there's a lot of compensation to Mr. Carney from Brookfield, as you can start putting together. So you have the stock options, right, that he's going to be able to sell at some point and after they vest, and then make some money on it based on the increase in the Brookfield shares that go up over time. Then he has the deferred stock options, which he has to wait until they actually mature in order to actually get the share value paid out to him at that time. And then you have these carried interest payments. So what Cooper was pulling out of Mr. Bieber was that the fund has to achieve a certain value or value increase in order for Brookfield to essentially cash in, right? And why is that? Well, that incentivizes Brookfield and these other venture capitalist firms. Brookfield is not going to be unique in this, to ensure that these funds that people are investing in, like a mutual fund, are going to perform well for their investors, right? So that's the whole point of this. So if the fund meets or exceeds the investment targets and the value targets, Brookfield gets a nice payout. And then these carried interest payments go to the Brookfield executives who were there to actually help set it up and help market it and help raise capital for these specific funds. So that's what Cooper was pulling out of them. Very interesting that he says, okay, so what's the range of the percentage there? And Bieber tries to dodge and say, well, it depends on the fund, and then ran out of time. So we'll see if they come back to this.
Do you know Mr. Carney?
I do.
And when was the last time you spoke with him, or texted with him, or emailed him, or exchanged letter mail with him?
I'm here to tell you that no one at Brookfield has communicated with the Prime Minister in relation to Brookfield or its business. That's what we're required to monitor. That's what I'm here to confirm.
My question is, when was the last time you communicated with the Prime Minister? And you're required to answer.
I'm happy to answer.
You
That's to
obfuscated
mine.
with your first response, sir, so I'm giving you the precision that you're required to answer the question, and it is directly when you last communicated with Mr. Carney.
Since he departed office, I have met with him only once.
And what was the nature of the meeting?
I contacted him to have a discussion about the rise in hate incidents, particularly anti-Semitism, across Canada.
And what was the date of the contact and the date of the meeting?
I contacted him a couple weeks before that, maybe more. The date of the meeting was Friday, October 3rd or 4th.
And did you meet in person or virtually?
I met in person with him. I took the afternoon off, and I came to Ottawa on my own dime.
Okay. And did you meet with him here or in the Prime Minister's office on Wellington?
I believe it's the Prime Minister's office.
Okay. And is that in this building, or is that in, because he's got a couple. So is that in this building here, or is that the one down the street?
On the corner.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was an uncomfortable exchange, Mr. Bieber. Well, I'm not here to talk about meetings. Well, you're required to answer, sir. Oh, well, it was about anti-Semitism. You mean the one thing that the Liberals don't seem to really care about? Is that the subject that you're talking about? Sounds like this came probably after Mark Carney designated that Palestine was recognized as official state from Canada's position, rewarding Hamas and the terrorists over there. Is that the one? And this is leading up to the federal budget being dropped, which was subsequently delayed shortly after that. Is that the one? Oh, okay. Got it.
Mr. Gould, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bieber, Brookfield has investment projects throughout the world. Do you have any activities in rare minerals like lithium?
We do not have direct investments in lithium, to my knowledge, no.
Est-ce que vous avez des projets d'investissement dans des
Do you
lots?
have investment projects in housing?
Yes, we do.
Est-ce que vous avez des projets d'investissement?
How about for trains like the high-speed rail? Is that something that could be interesting to Brookfield in Canada?
We don't necessarily target rail, passenger rail, but we do have cargo rail.
Est-ce que vous avez des intérêts, des investissements dans les
Do you have any investments in clean energy?
We have a
Est-ce
large
que vous
renewable
avez des
power business.
projets, des investissements?
And how about nuclear projects?
We do,
Est-ce que-
through our investment in Westinghouse.
Est-ce que vous avez aussi des projets dans...
And what about data storage?
We do.
Est-ce que vous avez des projets...
AI?
Il y a beaucoup de ces projets-là qui sont...
A lot of those projects can also be found in the federal budget. For some of those, would they require permits, environmental agreements? Some of those require negotiations with Indigenous communities, and it would help Brookfield if the government could offer assistance for those projects, correct?
Would have to apply for whatever permits are required, and we don't expect to be treated any differently than any other business in doing that. And we do it through our portfolio companies, which I'm happy to explain.
Est-ce que ça serait raisonnable de penser...
Would it be reasonable to believe, given that the Prime Minister, Mike Carney, left Brookfield on January 16th, and you said it in your opening remarks, that he would have been aware of potential investments for Brookfield for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, our investments tend to be very chunky investments in large-scale companies. So our pipeline of opportunities tends to shift over time. And the pipeline of opportunities 1 month may be very different to another month. So he wouldn't know what.
Ma question est simple. Est-ce que
My question is a simple one. When Mark Carney left on January 16th to become leader of the Liberal Party and then Prime Minister, was he aware of Brookfield's orientation in his role as VP? He must have been aware of something.
I thought you were asking about specific investment opportunities. He was certainly aware of the strategies that we were pursuing in our funds. We're actually very public about it. Anybody who reads our disclosure would understand what our strategy is.
que le budget fédéral présentement peut...
Could the federal budget assist you in solidifying certain contracts, given that the federal government will be facilitating certain projects?
I'm not close to every single portfolio company we have. We have over 2,000 businesses that we own as part of all of our funds and our investment strategies. What I can say is that Brookfield, like any other business, and our portfolio companies, like any other business, will assess policy. They're informed of policy at the same time as everybody else, and will react in the manner that is in their best interests.
Donc, tout ce que...
So what I listed out to you in Brookfield's investments, and they can be found in the federal budget, is that a coincidence, or was it implemented because that's what needs to be done?
I can't speak to what the Prime Minister has in mind. We don't speak with the Prime Minister about policy or any other matters that would impact Brookfield's business. But in reviewing the policies that the Prime Minister has espoused, I would say they're good for a host of different industries, and how it plays out for any particular company is very uncertain.
That's interesting. Okay, so that exchange, very revealing. So, do you have investments in basically all of these things? And he says, well, we don't have direct investments in lithium. We engage in investments not so much in passenger rail. He didn't say no. He said, but more so in cargo rail. Okay, fine. Yes, data centers. Yes, we have a large investment in green projects. Yes, in housing. So then the question comes, okay, so doesn't the budget kind of help you? Well, we're going to be very aware of policy and react to it. Yeah, I'm sure you are. Sure you are. Remember, Mark Carney at one point talked about the fact that if you want to get rich, you change the policy. That way you know what you're going to be investing in. So if you already make these investments and then you change the policy and the policies affect all of these things that you're investing in, wonder what happens. And then he says, well, we don't talk to Mark Carney about policy. Oh, really? So when the Brookfield executives have met with him a couple of times in New York and London that we know of, you guys were just what? Chatting about the Blue Jays? Is that what you were talking about? You weren't talking about actually anything serious? Never mind the fact that we had Marc-Andre Blanchard tell everybody, oh, well, he's been talking to, some of the most important investors in the world. Okay, so if you're talking to some of the most important investors in the world, you're not talking about policy? Really? Those are some problematic answers, Mr. Bieber. I don't think they should have sent you, but I'm glad they did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bieber, you stated earlier that there are 2,000 Brookfield-owned and operated companies. I would note that only 103 of these companies have been publicly disclosed by Mr. Carney and are subject to his ethics screen. In other words, 95% of Brookfield companies are not the subject of the ethics screen. Will you undertake to provide a list of the 1,900 other Brookfield companies?
I presume that in conversations and the and discussions with the ethics commissioner, that list was produced.
I'm asking you, will you undertake to provide us with a copy of that list? Because when a Brookfield company makes money, Brookfield makes money. You said that. And consistent with that, the success of any of these companies contributes to the value of Mr. Carney's stock options. And so I would submit that it is of material interest. Canadians do deserve the right to know what these other 1,900 companies are, 95% of which are not subject to the ethics screen. So again, will you undertake to provide that list?
Many, many, many of those would have no ties to Canada.
So the answer is no. Is that your answer?
I will take it away.
You'll take that under advisement?
Sure.
Okay.
I will.
Now, you stated in answer to my previous round that the 20 companies that are part of the holdings of the Brookfield Transition Fund 1 are listed in Annexure A. The problem with that is that they aren't identified as being part of the holdings of that fund. So we don't know what those companies are by looking at Annex A. And I would submit that that is a problem from the standpoint of transparency, because these companies are disproportionately the most lucrative part of Mr. Carney's future bonus pay. So will you undertake to provide a list that specifically sets out the holdings in that fund so that we can see exactly what they are? Because there is no transparency.
Well, there would be perfect transparency to the ethics commissioner, and I think that question should be addressed to the
I'm
ethics
asking,
commissioner.
I think there's an interest for Canadians
I
to know
understand.
a level of public transparency. You can provide us with a list. You already know what the 20 companies are. So
But I think that should first be addressed to the ethics commissioner.
I'm asking you. So your answer is no?
My answer is you should be speaking to the ethics commissioner about it, because there is perfect transparency with him.
So I will take that as a no, but you're not prepared to undertake that.
What's the problem? I thought he doesn't opine on conflict of interest process. I thought he doesn't talk about that. It's the first time they've been involved with government. He doesn't really fully understand it. But now he's telling the MPs what they should be doing? Isn't that an interesting contradiction in terms? Well, you should be talking to the ethics commissioner. No, we're asking you. It's your fund. Well, you should talk to the ethics commissioner. Why are you saying no? This is an easy one. Or is it?
I also asked you a question about what are the LPs. And you said unequivocally Brookfield doesn't disclose, doesn't release the names of LPs. And I would submit that is a real problem here. And I'll tell you why. Because Mr. Carney set up the fund. This is a $15 billion fund. We're talking about deep pockets here, formed with investments based on deep relationships that Mr. Carney has. And I think Canadians deserve to know who is invested in Mr. Carney's future bonus pay. I note that a Fitch ratings report shows that 27% of the 21% of those funds are the pool of the funds are banks. 23% are from sovereign wealth funds. So is Mr. Carney beholden to the Qatar Investment Authority? Is he beholden to the Saudis? Is he beholden to the Bank of China? We know he got a $276 million loan from the Bank of China when he was the chair of Brookfield in November of 2024. So I would submit that it is material. It is material, and I would therefore, on that basis, ask that you provide the names of those LPs.
I've already answered that question.
And so the answer is no.
That's not the answer that I gave.
Well, then I've been provided an answer.
Well, I said that we would take that under advisement.
You'll take that under advisement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper.
So that wasn't the answer he gave before. The answer was we don't disclose that, but that's okay. Now he says he'll take it under advisement. The issue that we have here, and I'm glad Cooper raised this because this is really important, folks. It's not just Mark Carney that's the issue, right? So he creates this fund, and he has interests in it. He has carried interest payments that are going to benefit him. And if there are other nations that are investing in that, if there are other companies that are investing in that he's meeting with, we need to know who they are. Because he may be meeting with investors that aren't Brookfield, but have a stake in that fund. And if Canada is altering our policy position to benefit companies or people that have a stake in that fund, that's a conflict of interest. And we need to know. We need to know if he's beholden to. Because they're right. China may actually have an investment in that fund. That would be a problem. Because now all of a sudden we're cozying up to China, even though Mark Carney had said that they're the biggest threat to Canada. Isn't that interesting? Maybe the United Arab Emirates. They have an investment in the... We don't know. And this is the whole problem with this whole thing. All of it. And if he was liquidated of all of these potential conflicts, then there's no problem with a conflict of interest. So I'm glad Cooper brought this out because it is very, very significant. You may not only be making money off of that, you might be beholden to foreign nations as to the performance of that fund, which may be relying on the policy stance of Canada, which you are the Prime Minister of doing.